Well, we're getting very close to the end of this class, and today we will end our unit on the Rasha of the four children in the Passover Seder, and that will leave us with one more unit, which we'll do a little bit in class and for the next Ed puzzle, and whatever remains we'll use for your final exam. So, which will kind of just be counting as probably a double Ed puzzle or something like that. So here we go, everyone. We learned we had a really great class last time. We were looking at what the evil child said, and just kind of give us a summary. Here's a summary of what we've got so far. So here's what we know. We know that we've got a child who's labeled as wicked, who doesn't really seem to be asking a wicked question. We've got a parent whose response doesn't seem to be answering a wicked response. However, nevertheless, even though the child's probably not saying something too wicked, nor is the parent responding in some kind of way that's saying you are wicked, we still label this child as wicked. And the question we've been asking in class is why. And obviously, my thesis is, and I think David Gilman was sharing this the other day, that this is proof that our rabbis want to have the Rasha part of the conversation, that want to take someone who's wicked, want to take someone who is rebellious and make them part of the conversation. Now, of course, right now we just have the idea that this person is a Rasha, but soon we'll get to the idea with the help of Dr. Josh Culp of why this person is rebellious. And I think there was a little bit of confusion about this, so I just want to make sure that we understand it. That, right, Dr. Culp looked at said like, oh, what's happening at this part of the Seder and with the four children is that that the father is responding to their intellectual capabilities. And one of the things he says is, well, wait a second, that's weird because of all these people, the wise child that's intellect. Simple, that's intellect, right? Doesn't have a lot. Too young to even know anything means like we don't quite even know how to assess his intellect yet. But wicked is not an intellect. Wicked or Rasha is talking about what if they're good or bad as a person. That's talking about a moral quality, not an intellectual quality. So what is the intellectual kind of equivalent of the wicked child? And I think someone said in class it's like the evil genius, or it's really the person who kind of uses their smarts to kind of change things or manipulate things in not a positive way but in a negative way. In a sense, that feels a lot like a rebel, like a not really a Ben Surah Moreh that we saw in the in the Torah and in the Mishnah, but it basically is someone who is kind of rebellious, who's basically trying to at look at our tradition and kind of ask questions that really break it in some way apart. By the way, just one question before we begin, right? So it says in the bottom of this Mishnah, right? A father teaches the child according to the dot of that child. And I said that because of this, we got the idea of the four children. Why four children? Like, why doesn't the rabbis could have easily learned from this? Oh, the Haggadah should have 27 types of children, or no, or the Haggadah should have three types of children. Why four? Why was that number given, and why these being the four? So I just want to kind of get a sense of why you think that is. Okay. And again, just like Dr. Josh Culp says, what is the intellectual equivalent of the Rasha? And I think that that's closer to kind of the person that we've been studying this year, like a guy like Korach, right, who isn't just being bad to be bad, but actually has a point and brings God into the picture and says, you know what, we're all holy. And you know what, Korach was kind of right in that regard. Like, he's not just and he's saying that God asks us to be holy, like that's what God wants from us. So how come, Moshe, you get the good job and we get the bad job? And so Korach has a point, right? And often that's what makes even the Rasha or the rebel very dangerous, because they're not just saying stuff just to say stuff, but they have a point and they have a logic, and it's compelling, and it kind of works. So just so we have just to go through again the evolution of the Rasha from the evolution of that wicked child. So first we have Torah has four conversations between a child and a parent regarding Passover. Those four children conversation must mean that the parent is responding to four different types of children. By the way, what else could be the four conversations? It doesn't have to be four different types of children, but what could it also be? Exactly. It could be it could be one child, but in four different moods, right? It's like actually we all contain at various points in our lives part of the where sometimes we're a chacham, sometimes we're a rasha, sometimes we're a tam, and sometimes we're she'enot yodea lishol. And then we learned that we started kind of trying to take each of these conversations and say, what's the child they're talking about? And it was really easy for us to figure out the wise child, and the child who doesn't know how to ask, right? That child didn't have a question, so of course that's that child. It was a little bit harder for us to understand the child who just asked, what is this? And the child who asked, what does this ritual mean to you? And especially since both of them are getting the same answer, God did some great stuff for me. So we learned that the first one's child does no ask, and we say, oh, this one might be the wicked one. Oh, yes, it is the wicked one. And then we learn, with the help of Dr. Josh Culp, that wicked is a moral quality, not an intellectual quality. And the intellectual quality that's close to someone who's doing this is really kind of the rebellious person. So here we are. We've brought in the idea of rebellion, which is, surprise, surprise, what this course is about. So now we don't really have the wise, the wicked, the simple, the one who doesn't know how to ask. Now I think the more truthful way of looking at it is we've got four children: the wise, the rebellious, the simple, the one who doesn't know how to ask. All right. Now I want to get to this question here. What has the Rasha actually done wrong? And Eitan and Luca both brought up in class that, hey, if we look at actually how the Rasha is speaking and we look at how the father is answering, sure, they might not be talking in specific Rasha-like ways, or the father's not answering in a specific Rasha, saying like, oh, you're a Rasha, I see that. We do notice that they both use some particular words. You is used by this Rasha. Lachem, you plural. Really, it's what do you all mean by this right? Or Maha avodah hazot lachem. I think a better translation for this is what this ritual this ritual is to you all. What's all of this to you all? Okay. And then the answer, which Luca said, oh, look at that. Isn't that interesting? The answer that's used is an answer that says me and I. God acted for me when I was leaving Egypt. So what would you call by one answer saying you, and let's say pointing, right? Who is he including in the you and who is he excluding in the you? And then for the parent, the same question. Who is the parent including in the I and me? And who is the parent excluding in the I and me? And I think understanding that will get us closer to kind of what's going on here. All right. Here is what the Passover Haggadah actually says. So the Passover Haggadah doesn't just include what the Torah says. What do you mean by this, right? The Haggadah itself, right? The rabbis who wrote the Haggadah interpret what is going on here. And here's what they say. Lachem velo lo. The stubborn, this just child, this wicked point where we're labeling as Rasha, uses the word, what does this all mean to you? And not to him. Meaning, he could have said, what does this all mean to me? Or what should this all mean to me? And if he had said that, we would have been like, wow, that's a really curious kid. He wants to know, what's the meaning of all this? How can I find meaning in this? But instead, he says, what does it mean to you and not to me, right? Lachem velo lo. What does this ritual mean, not to me, but to you? And so what is he doing there? Explain that. Okay, and the Haggadah goes on to explain. And since he removed himself from the larger group, he denies the essence of what it means to be Jewish. What's going on? Can someone explain that? What's going on there? He denies the essence of what it means to be Jewish because he removes himself from the larger group. Explain that to me, please. All right. Um, so, and if this is what this is what the child is really saying, if this is what the child is really doing, removing himself from the larger group, how is the parent's answer a good one, right? And we're going to see what the parent says in a second. But what I want to ask first, before we look at the parent's answer, I want to look at I want to look at this question is since when so one thing that's interesting is what is it when it says he denies the essence of what it means to be Jewish. He and the translation of that's the translation of these words Hebrew. Kafar kafar ba'ikar. He is a denier of kafar ba'ikar. He is a denier of everything about Judaism. And by the way, that word a kofar ba'ikar is someone who is kind of also known as the Apikoros, someone who is basically an anti-Judaism person. If you're a kofar beikar, and so that term is used kind of in like if you decide if you're like um, um, yeah, if you're like on Yom Kippur, if you go ahead and kind of eat bacon while you're driving your car, you're kind of a kofar beikar, right? You're kind of saying, I don't believe in any of this at all. So I want to investigate for a moment since when does separating oneself from the community make you a rebel or make you a denier of all of Judaism? What is it that is so bad about removing yourself from the people that it kind of makes you not Jewish? So give me a hypothesis for that before we do our investigation. All right, here we go. So we have two statements about removing yourself from the people, and I want to kind of look at them here. The first comes from a rabbi named Rabbi Hillel, and Rabbi Hillel is actually important because actually Rabbi Hillel is our example not of someone who acts low b'shem shemayim, but Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai, the way those kind of partner, those people who kind of are like our dueling mates, Torah boxing enemies. They fight with each other. They fight in a way that is a machloket l'shem shemayim. So it's interesting that we bring him up here as an example of he's saying, what does it mean? Why is it so bad to separate from community? Why is that like being a kafar be'ikar? So Hillel says the following. He says a bunch of things in this Mishnah, and it's part of part of the Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, which is kind of a nice sayings, things you might find in a fortune cookie. So Hillel Omer, Al Tifrosh Min Hatzibor. Hillel says, do not separate from a community. But Hillel also says this, that's the first thing Hillel says in a group of things that he says. He also says, don't believe in yourself until the moment of your death. Don't judge a person until you reach their place. Don't say riddles are so complicated to understand, even though you know that in the end people will understand them. Don't say I'll study Torah when I have free time, because maybe you just might never have free time. I think about that one a lot. But so explain why is this phrase "Al tifrosh min hasibur," don't separate from the community, come as one of these five statements? Why is it part of this grouping of statements, and why does it come first? How does it relate to these ones that come? Okay, so at least here from Hillel, we're kind of getting this idea of separating from the tzibur is not a good looked upon thing. But all these other things are just kind of pieces of advice. So maybe it's just like, oh, here's some good advice. You don't want to separate from the community, but it's not saying. I mean, the Haggadah says one who separates themselves from the community, they are as if they've denied the essence of Judaism. Okay. Now we're going to look at another place that we see this, and this is in the Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit, talking about fast days, and he says like talking about kind of hard times for the Jewish people. And here's what it says: our rabbis taught, in the time when Israel is immersed in hardship and one of the people separate themselves, two angels that accompany every person go ahead and place their hands on that person's head and say, just as this person separates themselves now in a bad time, in the same way that person will never see or participate when his community is having a great time. So kind of summarize what they're saying there. And by the way, we know about two angels accompanying everyone everywhere they go. We know about that because Shalom Aleichem, that's the prayer that we say when we're looking at our Shabbat table. We're saying peace to the angels that are kind of on either of our sides of each of us. So why is, according to this piece of Talmud, why is it that separating yourself is such a bad thing? Okay. And let's move on. So we learn on that same page a little bit later down, it says the following. Tzaddik Adam, Yitzar Adam im hatzibur, shechen matzinu, uh, Shechen Matzinu b'Moshe Rabbeinu Shitzar. Okay, Persians should suffer when her community suffers, and here's the proof. So the Talmud searched for a proof text, a proof for this statement that a person should suffer when her community suffers, and he did it by looking at this little part of the Torah, and it's right after the Israelites leave Egypt and they get attacked by Amalek. Where is the part of this that you think is the proof text for that a person should suffer when the community is suffering? Okay, try to figure that out. Okay, so where is it? So where do we have it? Okay, so what the Talmud is going to say, I'm surprised I don't have it here. What the Talmud is going to say here is that um, shouldn't Moses is sitting on a stone, right? He sits on a stone, which is kind of not so comfortable, meaning, shouldn't Moses have had a pillow or something like that? And the very fact that he doesn't have a pillow, and he almost is kind of a sense of he refuses to sit on anything but something that's a hard and cold and substance that would cause you to suffer, or just sitting on a chair or a hammock. No, he sits on a stone saying, hey, how can I sit in a place of comfort when my people are in dire straits because they're being attacked and at war? So this is the proof text, at least for the Talmud, that just when a community is suffering, we make sure that we are suffering as well. And if we don't, if we're like having a great time while our community is suffering, then we're in some way out of sync. So a rebel is then one who removes herself and dissociates herself from the Jewish people, right? And why is this such a bad thing? Okay, and what I'd like to know is, I'd like us to think back for a second and ask ourselves, of all the different rebels that we have seen, all the different places of machloket and lack of machloket, and obedience and lack of obedience that we've studied from the beginning of the year. Have you ever heard of this definition before? Have you ever seen, have any one of our rebels, our Ben Sorah Moreh, the woman in the creation story, Korach, the people of the golden calf, are they removing themselves from moments of joy or moments of happiness of the people? Are they basically have a different emotion than the rest of the people have at a certain moment? Have we heard of this definition before, or is it something completely new? All right. Um, and then my other question is the following. Does the Rasha really fit the definition of one who has separated himself or herself from the Jewish people, right? Remember, we're sitting at a Seder, and the father is basically saying, or the father or the mother or the parent is saying, because you are saying, what is this, all this about to you, and not to me, you're basically separating yourself from the Jewish people. And because of that, it's as if you've turned your back from the Jewish people. So, first of all, that question right there, does separation mean turning your back, right? Or there's two different things or two the same things? And the second thing is, does the Rasha really fit the definition of one who has separated himself or herself from the Jewish people? Explain that, right? And again, I would like to say, you know what? The Rasha is sitting around the table. He's sitting at a Jewish holiday. He's at the table. He might be angry. He might be questioning, but he is there. She is there. She is not disengaged. There are other people who are off not even realizing it's a Jewish holiday. There are other people who realize it's a Jewish holiday and are saying, I'm not observing. I'm not even coming to the table anymore. Aren't those the real rebels? Aren't those the real Rashas? Or is the rebel, this is talking about a Rasha from within, a rebel from within. It's very interesting. Okay, and now let's go right to the. I want to see for a second about what the response is to the rebellious child. What does the rebellious child see? We changed Rasha to rebellious. What does the rebellious child say? What does the machloket maker say? What is this work to you? To you and not to me, which means that he has excluded himself from the larger Jewish group and he has turned his back on Judaism. So you, the parent, will blunt his teeth and say to him, by the way, that word, that term, blunt his teeth, is a very interesting term. Um, and you will say to him, because of the food stuff on this Seder plate, God did great things for me when I was going out of Egypt. And the rabbis say, me, when the parent says me, they're saying, God did it for me, but God would not have done it for you, because if you had been there, you would have never been saved. If you had separated yourself from the people in their time of hardship, you would have never been saved. You would have never thought that you were part of the people. And by the way, God does differentiate between, God doesn't just necessarily um, free all of the Jewish people, right? There are some that actually end up staying. Some people who don't want to leave. Some people who actually deny God and deny that God is behind the plagues. And actually, supposedly, the ninth plague, the plague of darkness. During that plague, all the people who were like your rebels, they actually they were all killed, according to rabbinic legend, which means actually everyone leaving Egypt were docile, were totally obedient. But surprise, surprise, not so obedient, because they built the golden calf pretty soon, 50 days after leaving Egypt. Okay, so our big takeaways are what? What are our big takeaways from kind of this unit about who the rebel is, about why the rebel is noted here, why the rebel is important, and how removed actually that rebel is. That rebel is. Here's what I kind of thought. Right, the Passover Seder needs to invent a rebel, even if that rebel is not explicit. Like the Passover Seder needs to basically clothe someone and say, "You're the rebel. This is what you would say, and this is how we answer." And two, the rebel is defined by someone who has removed herself from the Jewish people and someone who does not feel is not in sync with the emotions of the highs and lows of the Jewish people at a given time in history, at a given time during the year. Okay. Our final piece is we're leaving the Passover Seder, so we're done that unit. And now, just for Lag BaOmer, I want to show you all a video about the life and time of probably the greatest rabbi who ever lived, Rabbi Akiva. And you'll see that actually part of his life, or many moments of his life, continuing are showing himself as a rebel in some way, as a machlokim. But you'll see that it's all pretty positive as well. So what I'd like you to do is watch the videos. I think you'll see a few cameos of people you know and love from our class, and hopefully you'll laugh a little bit as well. But I'd like you to, as you're watching the video, to write down kind of the moments where you see that Rabbi Akiva is a machloket maker. And I think there are at least 5 of them along the way. Um, so and explain kind of why you think he is in those moments. So here we go. You can find, where can you find this video? You can find it by going to my TVT under semester 2. If you miss a class, click here for the video, and you'll see it as the final thing that's called Rabbi Akiva. Good luck with that, everyone.